Welcome, Grief Nation listeners. And today on Grief Talk, we're going to be speaking with Addison Duane. We're so blessed to have her here today. And she's going to be talking about what is a trauma-informed educator. Hi, Addison. How are you?
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is going to be really fun.
You're so welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. Let's talk about the power of trauma-informed education.
Yeah, so just in general, in terms of sort of where it began and kind of the information around it, I think being a trauma-informed educator it's very different. It looks and sounds very different than a traditional classroom teacher, which I think is very powerful and such a cool thing. I think the number one shift that we have moved away from as teachers that are really developing and also implementing these practices is that we are really shifting away from looking at challenging behaviors as a result of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And now looking at, instead of saying, oh, they need a consequence, oh, we need to do something really punitive, we now analyze those behaviors as a lagging skill or an unmet need as a direct response to a traumatic event or chronic stress that they've experienced.
Wow.
And so it's really moving away from moving towards responding instead of reacting. It's teaching about the different parts of the brain. It's having kids know what the release of adrenaline feels like in their body, what the emotional brain is, how to regulate, what it feels like to be dysregulated. And all of those things, just knowing what I know in my own experience, have truly changed the game when it comes to educating the next generation of our kids.
Oh my God, beautifully said. Thank you so much for.
And I'm so passionate about it, so you'll have to cut me
Yes.
off if I talk too much. You're gonna have to be like, wrap it up here, okay?
No, you are awesome. I love it. I love your spirit.
Oh my
Share
gosh.
your journey of becoming a trauma-informed educator.
Yeah, so it's been a journey. Let me say that. So I've been teaching for the last 6 years as an elementary school teacher, and I've taught a mix of intermediate, 4, 5, 6, and primary, kindergarten through second grades. I've also worked as an instructional coach for beginning teachers.
Mm-hmm.
But also in the same vein, I am a researcher through and through.
Yes.
And so I'm always the person on the team that is bringing a research study. I'm bringing an article, a book to a meeting. And so my journey to becoming trauma responsive really started with my school administration, bringing this idea to us teachers and saying, there is this practice that exists out there. Does anyone want to kind of dig in, learn more? And they facilitated a lot of great book studies and discussions. And I really took it and ran because it just spoke to me on a level that I'd never really experienced before as a teacher. I was really passionate about culturally responsive learning and restorative practices. But when I heard this, which was kind of the blending of all of those things, I just knew that this is exactly where I need to be.
Wow.
And so then from there, just attending the national conference and now doing a trauma-informed pilot in my own 5th grade classroom, I'm just really actively daily working to facilitate a classroom environment that's going to meet the needs of my students who have experienced stress and trauma.
Wow. That's amazing because that has always been needed, but I guess it's more so now the time, I guess, of course, the research and the studying, and that's how we've gotten here. And I'm just so appreciative that this type of practice is out there for students because we need it. It's long time overdue.
It is. And it is, to your point too, the research is still relatively new because we're slowly seeing things and there's studies and there's not even a national quantitative study yet. Everything's qualitative and smaller and done by social workers and doctors. And so it's cool that teachers have kind of really grasped onto this concept, partnering with the practitioners who are licensed to do the therapy and the work on that. But to bring it to the students because teachers have an incredible impact on a large group.
Yes. Oh, yes. I totally agree. Oh, yes.
I mean, there's 30 kids in my room every day. That's a lot of bodies. That's a lot of, of prepubescent bodies, I might add.
But there's a lot of them.
Yes,
exactly. So how does your classroom culture differ now than before your training?
Yeah, so in every way, truly. I think that it started small with some mindset shifts, just like those understanding the lagging skills, the unmet needs, the need to really move away from the punitive consequences. But then there became sort of these two large areas, these kind of buckets that have really led to a completely different classroom culture. And so the first is really cultivating and creating a sense of belonging in the room. And this is something that I think comes naturally to a lot of teachers, but for others, it has to really be, we have to really pay attention to it. Yeah. And so one of the biggest pieces is literally as adults adjusting the classroom space so that we are allowing students to know I'm welcome here, I'm loved here, and I'm safe here. And that shifting towards safety, just even that like general idea of safety has been so crucial for me in this last year of doing this pilot, because I mean, small things like I didn't even think about the way I asked students to line up would be something I needed to adjust from, like, all right, stand, facing forward with your voices off, to now like, hey, do you have a safe body? Like, do you have a safe space around you? Yeah. That has just been a really, really cool thing.
But the tone even makes a difference.
It does. It totally makes a difference. But things that I think we weren't like cognizant of before we got this training or had the research to back it. Yeah. So I'm here, I'm loved, and I'm safe, because we know with trauma, chronic absenteeism is a big issue. Yeah. And so a lot of times it's kids don't feel welcome. They don't feel safe if you've been suspended, if you've been asked to leave the classroom space for whatever reason. It's hard to re-enter. And so just being more mindful of that and really trying to take some proactive measures to mitigate those sort of negative effects, that's kind of the first bucket of the classroom culture shifting.
Okay. Wow.
And then the second is the literal classroom setup. So my classroom, I love to tell people that my classroom looks very different than a traditional classroom that you might remember in your days going to school, or that you might see right now, because we know that the environment cues the kids. And so we really need our environments and my classroom space to speak to the basic needs of my students. So from small things to the way the desks are configured in only groups of 2 or 4, to the color scheme, the color that I choose to bring into my room or not to bring into my room. We know that hot pinks and reds are very dysregulating. And so for us, like, we are very pro neutrals. Yeah. And like, if you think about a therapist's office, we are now trying to do that in our classrooms, which is very different than a lot of, like, I remember it looked like a rainbow vomited in my second grade classroom when I was little. Like, it's different. And a lot of elementary things are very colorful. And but we know for trauma affected kids, that visual piece it impacts them. And so my room looks very different. Like, when you walk in, it's very different because I'm really trying to meet the needs of those students and not dysregulate them more in the physical space.
Wow. That's amazing. I can only imagine being in there. Now you make me want to feel like I have to go to the classroom now. Gosh. Well, what are the principles of trauma-informed practices?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of what we kind of spoke to, before. I think people have varying definitions and degrees of what the principles are. I think the number one, more than anything, is just establishing the sense of safety. I think kids need to know that their classroom spaces are safe spaces for them to learn, but then also to feel their feelings, but also to regulate emotionally, to have relationships with their teachers, to have connections with peers. All of those pieces have to be there, and that all is rooted in this culture of safety. I think another principle is just really a mutual trust and support, and recognizing that this type of practice is going to give kids what they need in a way that's going to offer some really incredible support. And of course, other things like choice and cultural responsiveness and non-punitive practices are in there too. But I think the last one as well is just empowerment, really empowering students to own their journey and to be able to have those coping strategies and the skills that they so badly need to regulate their emotional brain.
Yeah, and that's important for them to understand that. To just understand that there are coping skills. We're not taught those, but if you guys are teaching them now, then that's amazing.
And we're really even starting before that. Like, we are going into the first explicitly teaching just what are the emotions, like what does it feel like in your body when you're happy, sad, frustrated. And then, okay, now that you're feeling those things, which you have a right to, every human has a right to feel.
Right.
Now, what can you do to appropriately cope? Because kids have learned coping skills. They might not be appropriate or socially accepted, but we all have them.
Yeah.
And so teaching the sort of more peer-reviewed or scientific or appropriate ones is a big piece. That's a big principle of the practices as well.
Okay. Can you tell us what are adverse childhood experiences, the ACE?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that, because I just had the opportunity. Actually, I'm going to like nerd out for just one second. I met Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris a couple weeks ago. She is the doctor who brought adverse childhood experiences, or the study, to Kaiser in California. In 1998, they started this ACEs study. And so the idea with ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, is that there are a list of 10 experiences that you can live before the age of 18, that ranging from things like abuse and neglect, domestic violence, mental illness, substance abuse, all sorts of things. And what it is essentially is it's kind of like a list, and you kind of say like, yes, I've experienced it. No, I haven't. And at the end, the score that you get for your ACEs, for your adverse childhood experiences, they have learned is a determinant for some of the health issues later in life.
Okay.
And so the test was done to kind of understand why certain populations or certain people experience heart issues and kidney failure and things like that later on in life. And an important thing too that I always like to say with ACEs, because I think teachers hear about ACEs and they're like, oh, I want to know if my students, lived this. My favorite trauma-informed practitioner, Alex Chevron, always tells people it is not our job as teachers to administer that assessment. Like that is for medical practitioners, doctors, to do this study. And then we're not going to be trauma detectives. We just want to support the effects as best as we can.
Right. Okay. And I'm glad that you said that, because I don't know why I broke it out. I said ACEs, but it's ACEs. Thank you for correcting me, so that I want to be correct in what I'm saying.
And it's an acronym, so I think either way you pronounce it.
Yeah, but I'm so grateful to you coming on the show, because this issue is so important about what you guys are doing and the changes that are coming. And a lot of parents don't even know that this is out there, or there are schools that they can opt into that have these programs. So I'm excited to learn all that you can share. And
the cool thing too for me is I'm just a regular general ed teacher. I'm in a regular public school. And so what's awesome is that anyone can implement, like anyone who's interested in the research and the learning can make some of these minor and then some major adjustments to better support kids. Okay. And because trauma, and you know this, but trauma is from the low-income communities to the richest communities. Right. There is neglect in gated communities in the same way that there is, it spans all populations. And so I think it's important that everyone is aware of it. Yeah. And that's why I think it's so cool that the conversation's really changing, and that we are starting to hear more. Like, I was so excited when Oprah had Dr. Bruce Perry on, because it was for 50 minutes, 60 minutes, because it was like, yes, we're talking about trauma. we're bringing it more widespread. Right.
And we're excited about talking about trauma. Isn't that something?
I know, isn't that funny? It's like not about the trauma.
Right. Just to have the conversations. That's just us being nerdy, like you said earlier.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So how do students respond to trauma?
Oh God, in so many ways. Right. You have 7 hours. No, I'm just kidding. No, so I would say, so we know that sort of the biological effects of a traumatic event or a stressed nervous system is immediately your body goes into either fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And so in the classroom, this presents itself in a lot of different ways. So fight and flight are the ones that we see very often. Freeze is another huge one. And sort of within those, we kind of like to categorize them into a hyper state of arousal and then a hypo state of arousal. And so like in my physical classroom space, a hyper aroused student who has experienced a trauma or chronic stress, because chronic stress affects the brain the same way that a traumatic event does, is I'll have a kid who is totally unable to focus, cannot sit still, maybe aggressive, a little resistant, argumentative, anxious, kind of like wound up, maybe impulsive, struggles with self-control. or self-regulating in general. That's kind of the one category. And then the other is that hypoarousal state where students are really defiant, they're withdrawn, they just shut down completely. They're going to avoid tasks. They're often the students that teachers without this knowledge will perceive as not caring, forgetful, lazy. I hate those terms so much, but I've heard them in my time.
Yeah.
And then, I think the other piece too that we talked about a little bit is that chronic absenteeism. So they're going to be tardy, they're going to be absent, they're going to literally be like not hyper, like the opposite of that.
Right.
And what's interesting about hypoarousal is that Dr. Stuart Shanker, who wrote the book Self-Reg, he argues that state is the most dangerous one to be in because it takes the longest to get out of. And so that's really hard when we are experiencing this in the classroom because it takes a long time. And then also we would never want our communication, our behavior management to send students into that state. Like I'm not going to engage in a power struggle that's going to lead to a shutdown because I know that shutdown is going to take way longer than, you know what I mean, to regulate through, which is easier said than done.
Oh yeah, I understand that very well. I have a grandson that is mild autistic, so I get the whole shutdown issue will be way longer than the whole, acting out. It really does, and it's just, trying to even, when I even think about him being in school, I, as a grandparent or just a mother would think about, sending their child to school, knowing that they have these issues or concerns, not issues, but that they suffer from these types of diagnosis that, sometimes it's just scary to send your child to school because you don't know how they are going to react today. Yeah. Especially when there's an added stress to it, which could be, a disorder or, autism or, that type of thing. So I commend you guys for the work that you do. How important is it for the teacher to develop interpersonal neurobiology skills?
I say for me, I'm like so important because I am the science geek that wants to know everything, but truly knowing the neurobiology of what's happening has been an absolute game changer for me. And I say this only because when we are experiencing, for me personally, when I'm experiencing a challenging behavior, removing the student and making it about the brain is such an objective approach that now my responses are so vastly different than they once were. It has gone from me thinking, oh, he's being willfully defiant to, wow, he has adrenaline in his body and he is in a shutdown state of hypoarousal. What are the tools and strategies I can employ right now? Instead of, oh, I need to call home, this kid needs to be suspended, etc. And then it just escalates from there. Right. And so knowing what's actually happening in the brain and also in your own brain, just allows me to really, like I said, respond differently because the kid that's cussing at me, like literally today, is not about me. That's not an attack at me. That's not like they didn't walk in that morning and say, oh, I'm going to cuss at Miss Duane. Like, this is going to be a great day. It is just the physiological reaction to having those stress hormones in their body. Yeah. And so I don't take things personally anymore. And I think that's a huge shift that has to happen if you're going to do this work, because there's going to be behaviors, there's going to be a lot of challenges, and I can't walk away at the end of the day thinking like, oh God, every kid was out to get me, because it's just not healthy. Yeah. And so knowing the brain science behind it has been that kind of catalyst, that key lever for me to switch the mindset.
Okay, great. Yeah. So talk to us about home visits. What are they and how have they impacted your classroom culture?
Oh my gosh, I love home visits so much. So home visits are amazing. The idea is that the teacher and other staff at the school, any kind of stakeholders in the student's education, can facilitate or participate in a visit outside of the school environment. And so I was trained through the Parent Teacher Home Visit Project. And so essentially I visit families and we kind of decide on a place. Sometimes it's at their home, sometimes it's at the park. I did one at Taco Bell, which was super fun. But the idea is just to move away from the classroom, because I think for some families, and just I think for a lot of like my own experience too, the classroom and the school environment can be kind of a daunting place. And so if you had a negative experience in school growing up, it might be harder for you to want to meet with your child teacher at the school site.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe not, maybe you're just more comfortable sharing. But the other cool thing about what home visits do is it really allows me as the teacher to build a relationship and a connection with that family outside of them as a student in a desk. So I get to see where they eat dinner, or where their favorite park slide is, or what their favorite
Yeah.
Taco Bell order is. And building relationships is really, really crucial to that key component of safety and belonging in the classroom space. And so if we can build a connection, and sharing cultural traditions and understand students beyond just that environment, it has a big impact.
Wow, that's a cool way of being able to bring them back in, being able to relate to something that was at home, or like you said, a favorite slide. Oh, that's a good technique right there.
Really, really cool, because it
Yeah.
just and it's non-punitive. Like, it's not like I'm coming in to judge how clean their house is.
Right. No.
And even the home visit project that trained us, we have a set of questions that we ask. We can deviate from them, obviously, but it's like, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? What was your schooling experience like? What else do you want us to know about this year and how things are going? Or do you have any questions? Or and so it's just a really authentic way to build a genuine connection. Home visits are probably one of my most favorite things that I do.
Yeah. But that's how we build relationships. But that's how we build relationships, about learning more about someone. So that's a great tool. I like that.
Yeah, no, it's awesome.
Explain your methods when using theories such as self-regulation and the emotional keyboard.
Yeah. So I think, gosh, I love them so much. So as a teacher, I know I cannot teach academics while also ignoring social and emotional components of the student. Like, I have to teach the whole child. I cannot blow through a fractions lesson if a student is stressed and dysregulated. So the emotional keyboard, so self-regulation in terms of that theory and teaching it, I brought that in at the beginning of the year, and students are working weekly. We do like a 30-minute self-regulation session where I teach them a new coping strategy. We practice it together. We gauge how it feels in our body. We practice, what would it feel like outside of this classroom? What would it feel like on the bus? What would it feel like at the grocery store? So that they can kind of begin to make those connections to places that they could use them.
Yeah.
And so we do a lot of regulating in class and have a lot of tools for it. And then the emotional keyboard is just a list of traits or emotional responses that are not hardwired. And that's from Eric Jensen. And so because of this, because we're not born with compassion and gratitude and sympathy, we have to teach it to our kids. And so we can't assume that a student is going to just naturally be gracious or show gratitude because they're not born with it. And so if we have to model it and we have to teach it. And so we do a lot of that in class too, like a lot of just explicit lessons around it. And they're short, like they're very small, tiny conversations throughout the day, even lining up for lunch or coming back from recess. What does it look like to have patience or understanding or humility? Like all of those kind of key traits that are explicitly taught. I didn't know that they were explicitly taught. Like, I don't remember as a kid having my mom go, "Hey, we're going to talk about gratitude today."
Right.
I remember her saying, "Say thank you."
Right. Right.
So that, as teachers, we have to do that as well with our kids. Because that's,
that was more just like a custom of a good thing to do, not necessarily, I guess, explaining it to us while we're saying thank you. You know what I'm saying? That was just a custom.
And the other thing too is for trauma affected kids, there are 6 developmental areas that could have deficits. And so the emotional developmental area might have deficits. And so if you've incurred a trauma, you might not have as many skills or as many tools as a student that maybe has not, to show that gratitude or to show that patience. And so we never want to assume that because they've experienced a trauma, they have deficits across the board, but we also want to do things to bolster those skills in kind of a proactive way.
Yes, I like that. What is the regulation station, and how do you check in with students who visit that area of your classroom?
Yeah, so the regulation station kind of ties into that self-regulation theory. So there is a little corner of my classroom where students can go when they are feeling overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, worried, feeling their feels, I like to say. But it dysregulated, essentially, any of those, feelings. And so they go to the corner. It has like a little tent, and it's a cute little area with some tools and calming activities. There's like therapy and finger fidgets and a rocking chair. And all of those tools are sensory tools that are specifically designed to regulate the emotional brain. And so at the beginning of the year, I teach students what it looks like to feel dysregulated, then to go to the station, to use a tool, and then to come back and rejoin the class in a way that's going to be like, not disruptive or distracting to others. And so at the end, they can do breathing strategies. They can, honestly, sometimes they can close their eyes for 5 minutes. Like they can take a little rest if they're feeling it. There's snacks over there.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they return, I have a little card that they have to fill out, and they just tell me very briefly, and it's all, they don't have to share their name or anything, but I need data on who's using it.
Yeah.
And they just say, why they went, why they needed to regulate, what tool they used, and if they were ready to come back to class or not. So just a little added accountability piece, just something extra so that I can, because if they're not ready to return to class, or if there's something more that they want to check in about, I need to be aware of it, but I also don't want to put them on blast in the middle of reading and be like, hey, why are you over there? What are you feeling?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just something small that's very, it's not a significant amount of time or extra writing. If they're not writing me an essay, they just check a little box and tell me what tool they used and how they're feeling.
As we all know, being an educator can be overwhelming at times. Tell us how important self-care is as a personal goal for you guys.
Oh my gosh, it's so important. And I'm glad too. I feel like the narrative is really changing around this in education as well. I also have to own fully that I've in years past, I've been really bad at this. I love what I do so much that it's very easy for me to continue to work and to put in a lot of effort.
Yeah.
But I also know that I have to be emotionally regulated, and I have to be my healthiest version for my kids. And so, and I feel that in myself. Like we talk a lot about the window of stress tolerance in our room, in my classroom. And so it's like my window of tolerance is smaller when I didn't sleep and when I ate a bunch of Snickers bars for lunch, or when I, am overwhelmed because I have report cards due and a family event and things like that. So I fully own now that self-care is beyond crucial, and it's more than bubble baths. Self-care is really like having the mental capacity to kind of work through and cope and regulate ourselves in a way that's really life-giving and meaningful for us as teachers.
Oh, right. That's good. So what are your thoughts on how to reach out to schools to train designated teachers or staffs to be certified master grief coach? Do you have any information on that, or how could we, talk to the, I don't know if it's school boards, or what should we do?
Yeah, so most districts, I think it's kind of, there's a couple different ways you could go about it, but I think most districts will have, because of the ESSA, the Every Student Achieves Act, nationally now, we have to have social emotional components in our school districts.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that looks like oftentimes is a department or a couple of people who are designated to work on those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so just reaching out to social emotional training specialists, instructional coaches, learning coordinators, whatever their job titles might be in districts. Some of the bigger districts might be a great strategy or approach. And then the other piece is a lot of schools have social workers. And I think that would be the first step for sure. Like we have phenomenal social workers at my school who I think would really benefit from this, and then could also kind of support bringing it to the teachers as well, and helping to facilitate those conversations because they know our kids, they know the need. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And how can we learn more about you?
I'm on Instagram, as
yes, you are.
My new BFF. So my Instagram is just at Miss Duane, MSDUANE. And on Twitter, it's my first name, Addison, ADDISON says. And then I have a trauma-informed podcast for classroom teachers specifically.
Okay.
And so it's not nearly as cool or fancy as yours. I'm definitely recording in my classroom. You are so legitimate. I want to be you.
Thank you.
But the podcast is called The T, just the letter T, because it's two teachers talking, teaching, trauma, and then we always have to spill the tea. We have to do a little gossiping of what.
I love it. Oh, you go, girl. I love that. That's awesome.
Yes. So those are kind of the ways. And then this fall, I will be entering, I'm going to get a PhD in trauma-informed classroom practices at Wayne State. So I'll be the first teacher in the nation to be in this program that they've kind of specially put together. And so I'll be traveling a little bit and doing some consulting, and then also a lot of presentations.
You're
from
amazing.
so,
I'm
yeah.
so proud of you. I feel like I've known you forever.
I know.
Oh, congratulations, honey. You
Oh my God,
deserve
it
it.
is very surreal, but I'm so excited. It
And I
doesn't
know you
feel
worked
like,
hard.
oh gosh, like you wouldn't believe.
I know you worked
This was
hard.
a rough season of life figuring that out, and then also teaching and doing it all. But
Yeah.
then it's worth it. So worth it.
Yes, 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 yes. So I'm going to ask you two more things.
Okay.
Leave me with your favorite quote.
Okay.
And what has your attention as an educator that you would like to see change or bring awareness to?
Okay. So my favorite quote is from Alex Chevron. She's Vinette is her new last name, or maybe Vinay. And it's a message to my students, and I have to pull it up because it is just
No problem.
good. But then the other thing that I'd like to see or bring further awareness to is, again, just continuing the conversation around mental health and social emotional learning. I mean, I think trauma-informed practices is really the future. I keep telling everybody that. That might just be me, like, super passionate.
No, it is. You're right.
It really, really is. And so if we can continue talking about it and bridging the gap between mental health practitioners and educators, I think we are going to see a massive shift nationwide. And that's just going to benefit our kids so much.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, here's my favorite quote. Let's see. It's a message to my students. And it says, okay, a message to my students. I care about you. You have value. You don't have to do anything to prove it to me, and nothing is going to change my mind.
Oh, you're so sweet.
That is my favorite one. And I say that to my kids every day. Like,
Aww.
It doesn't matter what the effects of your trauma or your chronic stress. It doesn't matter what behavior you have. It doesn't matter what you do or say. You are worth something. Now I'm going to cry. You matter. You are valuable, and nothing will ever change my mind.
Gosh, can we have like a million more of you? God,
yeah, no, I'm in it
you're
for
amazing.
So.
Thank you so much, Addison, for coming on to the show. I truly appreciate it. Grief Nation listeners, please follow, like, and share all of her posts. Go talk to your school boards, try to find out how can your school become a trauma-informed school, and research and learn more about it. Addison, once again, thank you so much for coming on. I truly appreciate you.
Thank you. I love you. This was so fun.
Love you back. Bye-bye.
Bye.